The year is 1980. In a smoke-filled boardroom, 22 NFL owners raise their hands. The vote is unanimous. The Raiders will not be allowed to move. The message is clear: this team must obey, or it will be destroyed. But one man refuses to bow. Al Davis, the fiery owner of the Raiders, looks the league in the eye and says, "We'll see you in court." What follows is one of the most dramatic battles in sports history. Courtroom wars, power struggles, secret deals, and a team that became the ultimate symbol of rebellion in the NFL. So here's the question: how did the Raiders survive when the league itself tried to end them? In this video, we'll uncover the hidden story of the Raiders' fight for survival. From the block move to Los Angeles, to bitter legal showdowns that shook the NFL's foundations, from a return to Oakland that nearly bankrupted the franchise, to the shocking leap to Las Vegas that no one thought would work. You'll discover how the Raiders defied the odds, how their outlaw image wasn't just branding, it was forged in battle. And you'll learn the lesser-known details of how each attempt to erase them only made them stronger. Stick with us until the end, because the Raiders' journey is more than football. It's a story of defiance, identity, and survival against all odds. Welcome to History of Raiders. If you love untold history and epic stories of survival, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for the ride. The Raiders were not born into power. In their earliest days, they were considered the other team in Oakland, overshadowed by baseball's athletics and stuck in a league that often treated them like outsiders. But that outsider label would soon become their greatest weapon. At the center of it all was a man named Al Davis. To understand the Raiders, you have to understand him. He wasn't a polished executive or a friendly diplomat like so many other owners and coaches. Davis was blunt, ambitious, and carried himself like a general going to war. He believed football wasn't just about playing games. It was about power, identity, and the will to dominate. Davis had worked his way through the coaching ranks with an eye for innovation. When he joined the Raiders organization in the early 1960s, the team was struggling. They didn't have a strong fan base, their stadium was underwhelming, and they lacked a clear identity. Davis changed that almost immediately. He embraced speed, aggression, and the kind of swagger that other teams avoided. The Raiders began to look and feel different from anyone else in the league. But success only made the tension grow. Davis wasn't afraid to clash with NFL leadership. In fact, he seemed to enjoy it. He had little patience for rules that limited his vision of what the Raiders could be. While other owners accepted their place in the league's hierarchy, Davis pushed back. He wanted bigger stadiums, more revenue, and complete control over the Raiders' future. By the late 1970s, this put him directly at odds with NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle. Rozelle was the polished face of the league, a man who valued stability, uniformity, and tradition. Davis was his opposite, a renegade who believed the league should bend to his ambition, not the other way around. The biggest flashpoint was the Oakland Coliseum. For Davis, the stadium represented both opportunity and limitation. It was functional, but outdated. He saw the potential for luxury seating, improved facilities, and revenue streams that matched the Raiders' rising profile. But city officials and league executives were slow to act. Davis wanted modernity, they offered compromise. Tension turned into outright conflict when Davis began looking at Los Angeles. The city had size, money, and glamour, the perfect stage for his Raiders. But moving a franchise was not something the league allowed lightly. Relocations were tightly controlled, and every owner had a vote. Davis knew this, but he also knew that staying in Oakland meant being boxed in. He wasn't interested in being boxed in. Behind the scenes, he began making moves, talking to stadium officials in Los Angeles, exploring partnerships, and laying out a future for the Raiders outside of Oakland. To the NFL, this was rebellion. To Davis, it was survival. By 1980, the battle lines were clear. Davis wanted out, the league wanted control, and the Raiders
once a struggling franchise, had become the focal point of a war that would test the very structure of the NFL. It wasn't just about one team anymore. It was about power. Who truly controlled the destiny of a football franchise? The league or the owner willing to risk it all? The Raiders were about to find out.
The 1980 Move Battle. By the late 1970s, Al Davis was restless. The Raiders had become one of the NFL's toughest teams, winning Super Bowls, building a fierce fan base, and shaping a reputation as the league's rebels. But Davis wanted more. He wanted his team to play in a modern stadium with better facilities, better revenue, and a bigger stage than Oakland could provide. Los Angeles was calling, a city of millions, the entertainment capital of the world, a market that could transform the Raiders from a strong franchise into a global powerhouse. For Davis, the move to LA wasn't just business, it was destiny. But the NFL saw things differently. In 1980, Davis officially pushed for relocation. He wanted the Raiders to leave Oakland and play at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. But when the NFL's 22 owners voted on the issue, the result was brutal. A unanimous 22-0 against the move. Not a single owner stood with Davis. For the NFL, this was about control. If Davis could move his team without permission, then any owner could do the same. Chaos would follow. The league wanted unity. The league wanted order. And to them, Al Davis was a dangerous outlier. But Davis had no interest in bowing down. His response to the rejection was simple: fight. The Los Angeles Coliseum Commission, desperate to bring football back to the city after the Rams left for Anaheim, joined Davis. They filed an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, accusing the league of running as a monopoly that unfairly blocked competition. Davis and the Raiders soon launched their own lawsuit, attacking the NFL directly. The courtroom became the new battlefield. On one side, the NFL, with its powerful attorneys, deep pockets, and a united group of owners determined to crush Davis's rebellion. On the other, Al Davis, a man with a sharp tongue, unshakable confidence, and a burning belief that the league had overstepped its power. The legal war was messy. Injunctions were filed. Judges were called to block the move. At one point, a federal court ordered the Raiders to stay put in Oakland until the matter was resolved. But Davis didn't blink. He kept pushing forward, defying orders and preparing his team as if the move was already happening. Inside the courtroom, the NFL argued that allowing teams to move freely would destroy stability. Rivalries would vanish, fans would be abandoned, television contracts would be at risk. To the league, Davis was threatening the very structure that made the NFL successful. But Davis and his lawyers hammered at one key point. The NFL was behaving like a cartel. By forcing teams to stay where they were, by refusing relocation even when another city wanted a franchise, the league was restricting competition. That, Davis argued, was illegal under U.S. antitrust law. The trial stretched on. Witnesses were called. Documents revealed secret conversations among NFL owners about keeping Davis in check. The atmosphere was explosive. This wasn't just a business dispute. It was personal. Finally, in 1982, the verdict came. The jury sided with Davis and the Raiders. The NFL had indeed violated antitrust laws. The Raiders were free to move to Los Angeles. It was a stunning defeat for the league. Years of legal pressure, unanimous votes, and courtroom strategies, all undone by one man's refusal to surrender. For Davis, the victory was sweet. He had not only secured the Raiders' move, but also embarrassed the NFL in the process. He had stood up against the most powerful sports league in America and won.
The Raiders officially relocated to Los Angeles that same year. The black and silver set up home in the Coliseum, and the fans in Southern California embraced them instantly. To Raider Nation, this wasn't just a move, it was a revolution. The team had broken free of the NFL's grip, and in the process, reinforced its image as the ultimate outlaw franchise. And behind it all was Al Davis, the man who refused to be told no.
By the mid-1990s, Los Angeles was supposed to be the city of dreams for the Raiders. The bright lights, the Hollywood mystique, the vast market. On paper, it looked perfect. But behind the curtain, things weren't what Al Davis had been promised. The stadium upgrades never arrived. Proposals for a brand new football palace collapsed. The city that had welcomed the Raiders with fanfare had failed to deliver the home Davis envisioned. By 1994, frustration boiled over. The Raiders, once seen as Los Angeles' proud rebels, were stuck in the decaying Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, a venue far from the modern arena Davis wanted. Attendance sagged, the stadium felt old, and fans were restless. Davis began looking back toward Oakland, the place he had left a decade earlier in a storm of lawsuits and bitter words. But Oakland, desperate to bring back its team, was willing to make amends. Civic leaders and business figures came together with one mission: bring the Raiders home. They offered Davis something tangible, money and renovations that would reshape the Oakland Coliseum into what they claimed would be a modern football venue. The centerpiece of this promise was a massive new section of seating looming above the field. It became known as Mount Davis. Mount Davis was designed as a towering luxury addition. It added thousands of new seats, luxury boxes, and club areas meant to attract high-paying fans and corporate sponsors. The structure was massive, so big that it permanently changed the look of the stadium. But while the city painted it as progress, fans quickly saw the flaws. The towering block of seats felt out of place. It ruined sightlines for baseball games, casting shadows and leaving many seats empty when demand didn't meet the hype. Still, for Davis, it was enough. The Raiders announced their return to Oakland in 1995. The homecoming was marketed as a rebirth. Billboards celebrated the Silver and Black's return to the Bay. The city poured in over $200 million to lure them back. Oakland, a city with deep working-class pride and a long memory of the team's glory days, welcomed them with open arms. But the marriage was uneasy from the start. Oakland taxpayers shouldered the massive debt of the stadium renovations, and many felt the Raiders gave little back in return. Mount Davis, built as a symbol of progress, often stood half-empty. The luxury market that city leaders had banked on didn't exist in Oakland at the scale they imagined. Yet despite the politics and the money fights, the Raiders' return lit a fire in their fan base. For many in Oakland, the Silver and Black weren't just a team, they were family. The Raiders represented grit, toughness, and an edge that matched the city itself. Black hole fans in face paint and spikes reclaimed their corner of the Coliseum. Sundays in Oakland once again became a storm of noise, intimidation, and loyalty. On the field, the Raiders went through cycles of struggle and revival. The late 1990s saw flashes of promise. By the early 2000s, under coach John Gruden, the Raiders reached another peak, making deep playoff runs and eventually returning to the Super Bowl in 2003. Though that game ended in disaster, a crushing loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coached, ironically, by Gruden himself, the very fact that the Raiders were back on the national stage was proof that Oakland's reunion had restored some of the old magic. Still, the tensions never fully disappeared. The stadium issues lingered. The debt from Mount Davis weighed heavily on the city. Critics accused Al Davis of playing Oakland just as he had once played Los Angeles, leveraging loyalty for financial gain. Meanwhile, Davis argued that the Raiders needed every advantage to compete in a league increasingly dominated by billion-dollar stadiums and corporate money. Through it all, the Raiders refused to fade. They wore the controversies like armor.
Each lawsuit, each relocation, each broken promise only added to their outlaw mythology. Fans saw themselves in the team's constant battles against authority and circumstance. Oakland's return wasn't smooth and it wasn't perfect, but it was loud, defiant, and unapologetically Raider. Al Davis never cared about fitting in. While other NFL owners preferred quiet negotiations and compromise, Davis thrived on conflict. He believed the Raiders were different, and he was determined to prove it, even if it meant fighting the league he was supposed to be part of. The feud between Davis and the NFL wasn't just about stadiums or money. It became a clash of identities. On one side stood the NFL, polished, corporate, and determined to maintain control over its teams. On the other stood the Raiders, led by a man who refused to be told what to do. Every lawsuit, every relocation threat, every public statement widened the gap. The more the league pushed, the harder Davis pushed back.
And that resistance shaped the way the Raiders were seen. They weren't just another football franchise. They became a symbol. The silver and black colors weren't chosen at random. They represented toughness, defiance, and a certain swagger. Fans didn't just watch games, they identified with the team's outsider status. The Raiders were for people who felt overlooked, people who wanted to challenge authority, people who didn't mind being hated. The courtroom victories also changed the NFL itself. Before Davis, league control over franchises was almost absolute. His legal battles forced the NFL to recognize that owners had rights too. The Raiders' fight in the early 1980s set new standards for relocation, making it clear that teams weren't locked in place just because the league said so. It was a turning point that echoed for decades. When other franchises moved, like the Colts, the Rams, or later the Chargers, they all operated in the shadow of the Raiders' legal battles. Davis had opened a door that could never be closed again. But this defiance wasn't just about law. It spilled into the culture of sports. The Raiders embraced their villain role in the NFL. While some teams tried to appeal to family-friendly audiences, the Raiders leaned into their rough image. Black uniforms, menacing logos, players who hit harder, played rougher, and didn't apologize for it. The league may have hated the image, but fans across the country loved it. The Raiders became more than a team. They became an attitude. Rap groups in the 1980s wore Raiders gear to symbolize rebellion. Movies used the Raiders logo to represent toughness and resistance. Even people who didn't follow football knew what the silver and black stood for. It was the cultural legacy of Al Davis's defiance. The Raiders were outsiders, and that made them iconic. Inside the league, Davis remained a thorn in the NFL's side. He often stood alone in ownership votes, challenging decisions that others quietly accepted. He sued, argued, and fought for what he believed was best. Not just for the Raiders, but for himself. That constant resistance frustrated the NFL leadership, yet it carved the Raiders' identity deeper into sports history. Every fan who wore a spiked shoulder pad in the black hole, every rival who cursed the team as dirty or unfair, every commentator who called them renegades, all of it traced back to Davis's refusal to bend. His battles may have started in courtrooms and boardrooms, but the legacy spread far beyond. The Raiders weren't meant to blend in with the NFL's clean and polished image. They were meant to stand apart. And because of that, no matter where they played, Oakland, Los Angeles, or later Las Vegas, they carried that legacy of defiance with them. For decades, the Raiders lived in a tug-of-war with Oakland. The team wanted a modern stadium, but the city never delivered. The Oakland Coliseum was old, outdated, and falling apart. The once proud black hole was still fierce, but behind the scenes, cracks were everywhere. Leaky plumbing, crumbling concrete, and a lack of luxury boxes that brought in money for other franchises. By the mid-2015s, the NFL had changed. Stadiums weren't just places to play football. They were billion-dollar entertainment machines. Teams with new venues enjoyed rivers of cash. The Raiders, trapped in the crumbling Coliseum, were drowning in comparison. Mark Davis, who had taken control of the team after the death of his father Al in 2011, faced a brutal reality. Oakland couldn't or wouldn't fund a new stadium. The city was already scarred by years of broken promises from earlier moves, and the state of California was in no mood to spend public money on billion-dollar arenas. So,
Davis looked elsewhere. First to Los Angeles, where the Raiders once ruled the 1980s. But the NFL gave the new LA stadium to the Rams and Chargers. The Raiders were locked out. For a moment, it felt like déjà vu. Once again, the league trying to sideline them. Then came the wild card, Las Vegas, a city with no NFL history, a city defined by bright lights, big risks, and an appetite for spectacle. It was almost too perfect for the Renegade Raiders brand.
At first, the idea sounded insane. Football in Las Vegas? A desert city with scorching heat, casinos on every corner, and no NFL tradition? But as the details emerged, the move made shocking sense. Nevada politicians were willing to invest nearly $750 million in public funding, a massive sum that California would never match. A state hungry for recognition saw the Raiders as the perfect ticket to legitimacy on the national stage. Fans in Oakland were heartbroken. For them, the Raiders were family, not just a team. Generations had filled the Coliseum wearing silver and black, their loyalty unshaken through decades of chaos. Many saw the move as a betrayal, another scar on a city that had already lost the Warriors to San Francisco and the Athletics soon after to Las Vegas. But slowly, resistance began to fade. The Raiders weren't dying, they were reinventing. In 2020, Allegiant Stadium opened, a $1.9 billion futuristic fortress rising from the desert floor. Black glass, glowing lights, and a design that looked more like a spaceship than a stadium. The Death Star, fans called it. When the Raiders ran out for their first game in Las Vegas, it was clear the gamble had paid off. The stadium was packed, celebrities filled the suites, and the NFL embraced its newest entertainment capital. The move had turned the Raiders into one of the league's most valuable franchises. The irony was impossible to miss. The team that the NFL once tried to crush was now shining in the league's flashiest new city, playing in a stadium that symbolized survival and transformation. From the very beginning, the Raiders carried themselves differently. They weren't just another football team. They were outlaws in silver and black, with a swagger that turned heads on and off the field. That identity didn't disappear when the league tried to push them aside. In fact, every battle only made it stronger. When the NFL owners voted against the team's move to Los Angeles, many expected fans to turn away. But Raider Nation didn't scatter. Instead, they rallied. Crowds wore black, not just as a team color, but as a statement. It was rebellion, it was loyalty, and it was pride in standing with a franchise that refused to bow to authority. The Los Angeles years only deepened that connection. In a city already filled with stars and bright lights, the Raiders carved out their own kingdom. Their image attracted fans from neighborhoods that had never cared for football before. Street culture embraced the silver and black. Music, fashion, even Hollywood picked up the vibe. The Raiders were no longer just a team, they were a movement. When the team returned to Oakland in 1995, some said the magic would fade, but it didn't. The Coliseum filled with fans who had waited years for their team to come home. They weren't just showing up for wins or losses, they were showing up to stand by the identity they had carried with them the whole time. The chants, the costumes, the face paint, the spiked shoulder pads. Raider Nation didn't need permission from the league to exist. They created their own world. And then came the move to Las Vegas. For most franchises, another relocation might have meant disaster. Fans might have walked away, traditions might have been lost, but the Raiders proved different. Their culture was portable. Raider Nation didn't vanish, it expanded. People from Los Angeles, Oakland, and new fans in Nevada united under the same black flag. The desert became the newest home of the outlaw spirit. Every attempt to erase the Raiders, every lawsuit, every relocation, every setback only fueled their mythology. The team's identity wasn't tied to one stadium or one city. It lived in the hearts of its fans, in the culture they built, and in the defiant stance that said, "We don't follow the rules, we make our own." The NFL could find them, block their moves, drag them to court, or threaten their future. But the swagger stayed. The black uniform stayed. The loyalty stayed. Through it all, the Raiders' identity endured.
untouched, unbroken, and still feared across the league. The story of the Raiders is not a straight line. It is a tale of battles fought in courtrooms and boardrooms, of cities gained and lost, of a franchise that was told, time and again, that it could not survive. And yet, every attempt to shut them down only made them louder. When the league tried to block their move, the Raiders answered with defiance and changed the rules of the NFL forever. When financial struggles and relocations threatened to erase their legacy, the fans kept the flame alive. From Oakland to Los Angeles, back to Oakland, and finally into the desert of Las Vegas, Raider Nation carried its colors, its voice, and its identity with it. The Raiders never had the polish of the league's favorite teams. They weren't built to be perfect. They were built to fight. That is why their image has endured, not just as a football team, but as the embodiment of rebellion in American sports. The pirate on the helmet isn't just a logo. It's a warning, a reminder that the Raiders never belonged to the NFL establishment. They belonged to the outsiders, the underdogs, and the dreamers who loved them because they were different. In a league where conformity is the rule, the Raiders proved that survival comes from standing apart. They showed that you could be hated by the system, resisted at every turn, and still carve your name into history. Time and again, they tried, but the Raiders survived.